The easiest way to describe Midnight Suns is a gift I didn't enjoy from the friend I love. While Midnight Suns is a glorious attempt at looking into a group less celebrated and expected than most superhero teams, it's also a deconstruction of the mature and battle-tested combinations that made XCOM games so incredible. It also completely, utterly falls apart under repetitive quest design, horrendous graphical representations in one of its main sections, and shallow mobile-like qualities spread throughout it in most of the parts that could have been amazingly interesting. Thumbs up this video, subscribe if you like it. Let's begin. I'm going to describe to you my experience with Midnight Suns, the good, the bad, and why they missed the mark. Midnight Suns starts out with a story about you, the hunter, awoken after 300 years to do battle with Lilith, who happens to also be your mom. Wrapped up in all this is Avengers Midnight Suns team up with some of the Avengers, more than 12 total characters. You have this awesome mix of supernatural, magic, and tech, which really lights the fires of imagination the moment you see them. You have the amazing expected characters like Captain Marvel, every bit of power, able to pretty much obliviate anyone within 1,000 miles. But you've got Blade, one of the coolest working characters in this game, combo killing like a blender piss for being misused at college parties. You also have Ghost Rider, double chain wielding, riding a whip, a pure hellfire and horsepower, who hasn't seen a break in life he couldn't slide right through, and a bunch of others. It's into these battle zone you take the characters to fight Lilith's forces, as well as take on side missions, friend mission, character missions, and other more secretive endeavors. The core gameplay when you go in is a card-based title, with you in combat with each of your 3 heroes, mixing in the decks that you've built and got, and drawing from those as a combined deck to make your hands and take your action. Now, each card costs against a total of uses, and each builds heroism, which then unlocks other moves. You can also get characters that have all kinds of cool cards, like ones where if you burn a redraw, that card actually comes back with another stat on it. Free cards, which let you take that card and play it without it counting. You have characters that have cards where if you knock somebody out, the character gets that card back without that action even being spent. You combine all of these characters into the mix, mixing and matching different types, the ability to throw enemies around a level with fiery whips, shoot someone in the face with targeting computers to ramp up damage done to them, combo punching them with universal might as Captain Marvel, and then throwing them through magical portals so that they end up on the edge of a skyscraper with a high chance of falling off. Later, you also get bull rush moves and other moves that you can use aside from the cards themselves. So if you don't have anything really useful, you just want to shoulder bounce some enemy like 2 pissy college kids passing each other through a hallway, you can do that. But it's like a 300-yard wide hallway, because as you notice, I did not mention movement or cover, and that's because they really don't exist here. Well, you can use heroism, and these points allow for you to grab some newspapers and flash them into the faces of a bad guy. Seriously, sometimes those do more damage than magical swords, or you can kick them into electronics. Overall, everyone in the game can move anywhere in these very small arenas, and there's probably 2 reasons for that. One, due to the infinitely smaller arena that you've got, it really doesn't make sense to restrict any kind of movement. And 2, cover doesn't make sense because the game has a system that causes reinforcements to come in, and I'll describe that in a second and why that really wouldn't work here. What also doesn't work are the missions themselves. They are boring. And I mean, they're straight up small in location, but the actual repetitive actions you have to take in the missions never become exciting. The main missions, you have your major opponent, but these are characters that you have to go in and you have to kill or capture or find a guy and go in and maybe interrogate him. You also have lesser known characters and elites, characters that can die right away from just getting hit, or elites that can give everybody all kinds of status inputs. But at the same time, you have these mission layers for most of the missions. For example, kill a dude for a pass card so that you can then grab a briefcase, open it, or smash a helicopter to stop it from flying away. And sometimes you get extra money or different things you can analyze back home from these. The problem is, after the 20th time, you start to wonder why everyone with a pass card is rushing to the roof in the first place, and why everybody who's in the helicopter doesn't just gun you down. But no one does, and it's repeated again and again. I should also mention that instead of getting better, no joke, they just add more briefcases, and then they start making the briefcases explode. And remember, you're still at the mercy of the cards that you're drawing, though you get a couple of free redraws every turn. This is combined with horrendously small battle areas that many times feel smaller than anything we would see in even comparative games. Initially, I wasn't against removing movement and cover, because to me, it feels a little bit cool. Unhinging the players from any kind of movement restrictions or cover systems at all feels very action-packed, and that's really the way a game like this probably should. good. But then the dreaded and infinitely repeated sentence popped up. Reinforcements have arrived. And you can see right when it happens why the game has an issue. It looks terrible and it plays worse. Every single level has these random guys coming in and they can move anywhere in the game level because there is no real restriction on ranges, which means, yes, you can chain attacks with many of your characters, which is awesome. Chain and Blade to kill 3 different dudes is crazy good, though Blade may have already gone once the actual replacements pop in. But without any real ranges, that means when the enemies go in, you can watch them run through, then they sort of lodge up, wait for their turn, and in some kind of comical loop, move a little bit and fire and just stay there, because running away won't help. You're still going to be able to get to them. You running away also won't help because they can still get to you. In board games, especially ones that don't deal with range, this is something that can pop up, especially if statuses are there, and that is, of course, in-turn status spam over and over and over again. Because you can't really protect anybody, a character is almost impossible to do so. And as the enemy should and do go for weak characters, that means many times you're going to get injured or KO'd characters at the very ending of a turn that you'll have to bring back at the starting of the second turn. Not such a big deal, except the game also reduces your money for that. And it's a bit tight after spending money on every single item, which I'll talk about in the transactions section. And it just makes no sense. Everyone moves like this, and the game handles it in this way. For example, Iron Man moves just as far as some Hydra dope who failed high school and thought algebra was slime on the rocks at the beach. Because you don't know the exact characters you'll fight before you go out, and because there is no ranged when you do go out, the idea that you can find some of your characters just getting KO'd just because happens a lot, especially in the higher difficulties. I had one particular tough character that I really ended up liking this enemy. He had a ton of hit points, but he KO'd everyone. Luckily, not all at once. But it effectively turned that end mission game to a huge quagmire of lost money and scars and wounds that meant I couldn't really take characters out the next day because all of them would have massive negatives, which then resulted in me going out with lesser powerful characters, maybe with lesser cards, even though the game does try to ramp them up level-wise to the hunter himself, and that repeated again. The best part of this is that the enemies have the same issue themselves, but you are also held within all of these different mission parameters, such as smashing a card or making sure you get a card before you go to the computer, and then the computer might be setting to blow up. So you're restricted not only from just fighting the main enemies you want to fight, but all of these other layers of sort of mini missions, and none of them are fun. What is fun is taking out the low-level characters. These guys, regardless of how hard you hit them, die. So you can end up comboing them and raising up your heroism by doing so. And I thought, hell, why not? I might as well do this. And pulling off these moves, building up your heroism is awesome because later on, some of the cards you get add heroism to them and cause horrendous bonuses. Very cool stuff. And it's like no one really thought how these layerings were going to work. For example, there's a lot of missions where you have to stop a truck from taking off. And by killing some characters in the game or in that mission itself, they might drop a card that allows for you to stop that truck from taking off for one extra turn. To damage the truck, though, you almost always have to take out an enemy who is a protector. But because he can move anywhere in the game, that guy might run all the way to the edge of another spot, KO one of your characters, then run all the way back to protect that place again. You do have some characters that can remove that protection, and you can also stun these type of characters. However, it tries to tell you that you can be flexible in these missions, but if you look at the setup, you look at the time stuff like the explosions, and knowing that at the end of every single turn, more reinforcements are going to come in, you actually lose a huge amount of flexibility, especially in the first middle half of this game. Every player is going to be playing almost identical to everyone else. Also, these missions have a really odd save system. For example, if you end up dying, you most of the time have to still do this mission. Now, you can load up an old save and go back and re-pick new characters, but if you don't, it pops you back into the last action of that mission. It just makes no real sense at all. If you don't restart the mission, you can't continue without it loading something, and you can't just instantly load an old save. What it does is says, return to main menu. So you have to return all the way to the menu, load the different save, go in, choose different characters, and go back. I don't know why that button isn't just there. This all may sound bad, but it's not. When things are going right and you get cool characters and you start really using and understanding the discard system and the way that you can build all these characters, and some characters have incredible synergies. And I have a feeling a lot of people are going to have different synergies that they choose. However, you will feel at the end like you may have different characters going in, but that we're all doing the same thing, as I said, because of the layering of the missions and just how brutally small those mission spaces are. This does definitely open up later in the game when you start becoming friends with characters who will bring in huge bonuses like more cards or more actions right at the starting of a spot. Now, let's say you do win. You're going to get your rating, which goes down if you had any characters KO'd. You also lose money if they do, and this depends on what difficulty you set, normal, hard, or the unlockable ones that come later, which really crank up the difficulty. Again, if a character gets KO'd, you do lose money here, and there's a lot of stuff you need to buy, which we'll talk about in a second. Let's talk about going back to your base. So when you go back to the base, this isn't a bad base per se. It's got some doors and some rooms that are barred shut. Some of them unlock as they're open for new heroes. There's a massive land to walk around in outside. There's a swimming pool or lake for you to talk about movies with everyone, as well as unlocking the grounds themselves. And you can get special items all over the place using arcane keys, which are different rewards from other missions. Now, this entire place is a timed location, though. So when you talk to a character or further the story, it's a bit like XCOM, where you can only take 1 or 2 actions, which normally would be fine, but I want to explain something very odd here. You usually have 1 mission a day, and then some larger problems you have to deal with when you come back and some cutscenes. There's 2 problems with this. The first, this is the sleepiest bunch of Rumpelstiltskin characters ever. They are asleep the moment it hits nighttime. The game turns off, though, any activities. That includes just analyzing items that you've found, not taking any kind of action with them, but just looking at them through the different character interactions that may occur in the base that you've upgraded. And while some of this changes, overall, everybody's stuck here. Inane conversations about paintings or helping another character decide just how mad they are at somebody else, and then sleepy time for everybody. And that's where we get to another massive weakness to this game. 65,000 lines of dialogue are supposedly here. This is without a doubt some of the worst writing I think I've ever seen. For example, one character and discussion involved me as the hunter, who's been asleep for 300 years. And they asked him, did he know what horse races were? Now, not ignoring that man domesticated horses 6,000 years ago, my character didn't know what a horse race was. But in the next second, dropped a joke about a 3-speed automatic transmission. And that happens every single time you go back home. A big issue here is that with comics, the drawings and the cells fill in the gaps. With the movies, the action and the quips are between the set pieces and parsed out for story beats like normal audiences will imbibe entertainment. Midnight Suns is just clicking on a button as 2 characters barely animate on screen. The game has 65,000 lines of this dialogue, and a lot of it does not actually even track with stuff that you've said before. If too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, too much of a bad thing is just painful. At home, you can handle all your companionships. These are a huge part of the game, or at least the devs have said so. Best friends with some, possible romantic interests with others. You can befriend partners on your team, and the more you do, the more bonuses you get, like team-ups or more cards at the starting of a match. That last one is insanely helpful. Don't ignore it. However, everything that ties into the companionships feels tacked on completely. Like I said, the results are good. After the game makes a huge deal of you getting compliments, though, you walk up to somebody and you think, this is going to be a big deal. I want to talk to somebody, give them a compliment, and you're like, hey man, you're good at leadership. And they're like, thanks, and you get a bunch of points in companionship. Or you can take them on a trip around the different places within the world. These are unlocking havens, places to go visit. Ignoring that bird watching, for whatever reason, seems to be all the rage, it's that no one seems to care particular attention to what's being said or if it even makes any sense. For example, one of the cutscenes involve you doing a fighting game with another character, and the sounds are playing, you're playing, that character doesn't even have a controller in their hands. Now, this may sound like a small thing. It is, but when you combine it with every other spot and the lack of real attention to any of this, and I'll talk about also that in the audio, it really starts to grate on you. This disappointing lack of real use of the IP or care and attention to a lot of what's going on. Even your character is so disinterested in the new location that you've found, it's often impossible to feel like they haven't cut a huge number of corners, and that just doesn't make a lot of sense. For instance, when running around your mansion and investigating, instead of having these moments like in most games where a character reacts to an item in surprise, maybe somebody says something off to the side, or you give a tidbit of information on your own as a voiceover, your character here, for the most part, repeats the same couple voice lines over and over. That is something. That sure is something. That's interesting. Interesting. That sure is interesting. Which is odd, since the snippets are so small and have the character react to the situation could have pushed the story so much further and caused you to ignore The odd shallowness, like for example, when you go out to spar somebody and you think, hey, this will be pretty cool. It takes a big effort in making sure you understand who you're going to spar with, what bonuses you're going to get. You hit spar, it looks like you're going to fight. Then it just loads up some lettering and says, good job, here's some points. So what happens is, instead of having a unique duck out of water thought process through this, or having some looking glass moments, you have a guy who apparently is not interested at all in a place that's not interesting at all. This age-old feeling that we had in XCOM of side characters and nobodies that existed should have been replaced by more of a feel of taking on your heroes. But you're left in this limbo middle ground. Blade sucking is just blade sucking, and seeing a team fall to a bunch of nobody Hydra enemies isn't heroic, especially when you have to basically tell Blade how to date somebody. And while the main scenes and main parts of the game do have some really cool enemies, a lot of times they're not. And where XCOM had enemies that felt weird or dangerous or sometimes a bit scary, the normal man against the snake mammalian type of creature, here you've instead taken the superheroes and made them feel ordinary. And what also is ordinary are the graphics. This game is like 4 games in one from 3 different generations. First, battle locations. They're not bad. Well, most of them aren't. There's a ton of debris. Some have interactive, some have dynamic elements in the background. For example, you can spend a card and go pull some debris off of somebody and save a hostage, or negotiate your way through some harsh diplomacy to get some information from a bad guy you've knocked out. I think those in the character animations that you see in those battle sections do look phenomenal. It's a very tight location. Again, remember that. But those spots aren't bad. The first time you see Ghost Rider turn into a car and Texas road stew a couple armed stooges on top of a skyscraper, I can't lie, that's awesome. Some of the later enemies and characters you get also look incredible, as do your finisher animations and some of the special moves. But everywhere else, this thing looks terrible. Low detail, blurry textures almost everywhere. Now, luckily, the foliage in the overland section outside of your castle itself is pretty interesting. It's got a design that has you needing special powered keywords to get through some of the doors to open more and more of it. But the house itself is just an awful, boring design. It's a T, basically. Almost nothing's interactive, and when it is, the moment you expect to see something really cool happening, especially if you spend a bunch of money to install that cool thing, nothing happens. Many times, it's not even a text-based blurb. You'll add on big parts to some of the machines you've got. They're not even interactive at all. It feels ancient. But the character detail inside of these spots is the worst part. Graphically, the characters look like characters from mobile games, and I would challenge that and say that some newer mobile games look better. For the first time, I went swimming and I had my plastic bodied dude appear. I legitimately thought the game had failed to load the textures. Everyone looks like this. Plastic faces, terrible lip syncing, all sorts of weird animation issues, like I said before, where it's almost like they didn't care. And then it all just did a disservice that culminated in the Hellhound. I don't mind. If you're ironing out the details of Spider-Man's face, I can handle it if you single-handedly make Iron Man look suspiciously like Doctor Strange, but with slightly different facial features. I can even handle it when my character shows up looking like a fucking Muppet someone glued pubic hair to his head and called it stubble. But look at this poor dog. I've seen more detail in FBI private papers. But at least it should perform well, right? Not so much. I tested this on a 3080 and a 4090, both on brand new i9s, and the game has a DirectX 11 and 12 version, as well as ray tracing if you want it. Trust me, you don't. The game isn't super performant even on the 4090. The ray tracing eats up a ton of FPS to the point that it may be worth it if you're okay with super low frames on these newer systems, but because of the way the game looks, the only time you're really probably going to see this is the foliage when you move around, and again, inside those battles. You could always switch it when you go into battles if you want. Now, DirectX 11 does seem to help some of that stutter that we've seen prevalent in DirectX 12 games, and the game does offer dynamic scaling FSR and DLSS. I found on the dynamic of its own setting, it wasn't near fast enough to really take care of any FPS drops. So DLSS and FSR are going to be the way you want to probably go. Neither have a sharpening filter though, and what you do get is a bit blurry, which is an option that I think almost every game should have until we really nail down DLSS. And this is where we get to an even odder section. This is a game where they've stated that the microtransactions will only be related to the cosmetics. Cosmetics that I gotta tell you are woefully poor most of the time. But let's look at this. The game only has one currency that's currently connected to anything worth real money, and that's in the store and connected to legendary skins. So at this time, the microtransactions at this time are not for specific parts, but instead for full skins, not directly present. That's fine. You know what is not fine, though? The infernal grind of money for the items. This is Midnight Suns 2023, right out of an NFL game or an NBA game. And it's representative of the grind and exactly how they're probably going to try to get you to use these microtransactions. For example, every color has to be bought separately. Luckily, it looks like when they are bought, they unlock for most everything else. They're $25 a pop, with legendary ones being insanely expensive. Again, these are currencies in the game, not ones you can buy at the time. This is the money that you'll be getting, and trust me, you don't get a lot. But let's look at this. Every prop is $50, every eyeshadow's $35, eyeliners are $25, cheapest clothings are around $25 to $50 a piece, and leaping up astronomically from there. While props for faces start at $75, whole head props start at around $125. Also keep in mind that room customizations and colors there are not connected to item customization. You'll have to rebuy them. Everything in the game costs some kind of money. Every action. Look at this. Want to take a painting down? Money. Put a new painting up? Money. Turn a screenshot of a comic book that's not directly related to the mission bonus into a picture? Money. But the game doesn't even handle, and this is one of the things about lack of attention, it doesn't even handle proper resolution and scaling for any of the art, meaning if you put up a comic book and it's even slightly off size, it looks blurry and terrible. Guess what though? Want to take it down, replace it? Money. Well, again, this is in-game currency over which there are more than 8 or 9 when you count the card upgrade essences and science currencies and all of that kind of stuff. It really does show to you just the kind of grind you're going to be facing. And again, a reminder, how well you do on some of those missions is going to directly affect that amount of money you have for any of these customizations. Now, going through this on normal once is something, but hitting those same mission types that are already shallow and tight in those spots again and again to get some kind of special color for your suit is going to be insane. Also, the game has some bugs about currency. This was crazy to me. I had a couple bugs that happened even after this last patch. This included occasionally the game zeroed out my money. Many times I had these essences. This is what you get when you create cards. You can also get more when you're burning them. You can get blueprints and all kinds of stuff. I sometimes would have 200 or 300 of an essence, go into a cutscene, watch some people talk, not ever making any choices or dialogue options, and then I would come back and it was 0. And that happened at least 2 or 3 times. This is not a stunningly high number of times, but when it comes down to money being so important, that was really devastating. What else is devastating? The voices. Yeah, we're just there after 20 minutes. I'm not joking. They're terrible. It's not even Avengers bad, because there you had your character swaying between casual modern, oddly uncomfortable, perfectly pronounced old ye English, and then back again, but there was a lot of action to back it up. Here, there isn't any real care. It's just this insurmountable problem that shows up again and again. No one seems to care. Fitting it is hard, so hearing someone pretend to be Iron Man or Blade or Scarlet Witch, that doesn't bother me so much. We've seen it in other games, but unlike Guardians of the Galaxy, which did everything it could to carve out a niche inside of a comic book and movie gap only wider than Drax's shoulders, Midnight Suns never tries. This also is referencing the bad mixing. They didn't also even adjust for Spider-Man's voice if he takes off his mask, which is a choice you can have. And I stopped counting the number of times where one character was talking to another one and it sounded like one was still in some old cavern somewhere and the other one sounds like they're in the main house. So what it results in is something like a Zoom meeting with someone who has hardwood floors, nothing on their walls, and a ton of reverb against somebody who's inside of a recording booth. And this happens time and time again. Let's talk about music. It's great. I liked it. From the orchestral themes, they have surreal creepiness when you're talking to some of the various bad guys, huge stingers that pop up. One actually surprised me enough to jump. The music is great, very atmospheric in a big budget symphony Jerry Horner kind of way, which I like. It's fine. It skews towards the Marvel movies, especially cinematic moments from Iron Man and Spider-Man, and a couple of other heroes that you get to meet that I won't spoil here. So the music itself, very good. The sound is hit and miss. The blast is Ghost Rider. You can, of course, tell I like him. Is awesome. When Iron Man drops some double-fisted rays of lovin' into an evil scientist's face, that sounds awesome. No issue with those. But when you go outside and the wind's whipping through the trees and the rain sounds start to creep in, it sounds like somebody's just quietly going, shh, in the background. There isn't a lot of variation there. It also sounds almost compressed as a sample. I haven't checked that out. And a lot of people aren't going to notice things like this, but if it isn't a low rate sample, it's most likely just the layers being a little too tight. I didn't mind those locations, and certainly exploring during the night and taking out enemy bad guys, all those specials are very good sounding. And I know almost nobody covers sound and music like that, so I get it that you may not care at all. But I'm sure you care about fun factor, and I'm sure you can probably figure out where I'm going with this. Every single time I started to like something in this game, something horrible got in the way. And a lot of them had to do with the very strength this game was supposedly supposed to have, which was the combat system. The cards were fine, but the way the combat is parsed out in the locations are not. Every time I felt synergy with a battle system, it fell apart with some rodeo mission structure that just seems so lazy. It's hard to even believe it is happening. Every time I wanted to hang out, Sleepy Dwarf and the 13 brothers were so interested in getting shut-eye, I couldn't do anything with the 45 pounds of crap I just carried through a dimensional portal and came home with. What's worrisome here is that at no part is there one specific trouble point. Nothing that makes you think, oh, I bet they didn't have the time or the resources. And for all intents and purposes, Midnight Sun is a complete game. The animations in battles are the best part, and they hold up really, really well, as so do the enemy designs. But again, those battles are so short and so small and so tight that it just starts to feel samey really fast. The big issue I have with this is that a lot of the game would require you to play it again and again and again to get more and more cards, even though one of the nice parts is within your system, you can actually create cards with blueprints and do all kinds of crazy stuff there. But I would not want to revisit this again. Just plain and simple wouldn't. Even when they tried to change up the action and missions, there might be one that changed it. The rest showed such a lack of interest in true map interest and making that even being able to bounce somebody off of a light pole or electrocute somebody fell apart because I sort of went in and was never surprised. It just never surprises ever. No matter how many times you go in, it's always like, I pretty much know exactly what's going to be offered to me. And that original offering wasn't great. So seeing it for the 30th time, super not great. However, while playing this, I could definitely see why some people would like it, especially when you look at Marvel and you look at card games. I like both of those, but this game is not for me. Personally, I would say it's wait for a sale, almost wait for a deep sale if you're like me and you're expecting less grind and more enjoyable level design. If you can ignore the level design issues that this game has in spades, you may enjoy it. Also, there's a lot of game here. There's a lot that you can do, and the overall length of the game is really just restricted to how many times you want to go through it and how you want to go collecting or upgrading those cards. There are some great moves here. I've tried to keep it as spoiler-free as possible, but still showed you a few heroes. There are a great number of them, and I got to admit, they definitely get better later in the game. I just personally wish I enjoyed it more, and there was a lot less boredom when it comes to the locations. And that audio work, that's pretty lazy. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the review. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Tell me what you guys think. Are you getting the game? Are you not getting it? Are you excited for it? Again, right now, I'll report back on microtransactions if they get worse, but the current microtransaction situation in this is less to do with what you can buy and more to do with the grind internally that may not even be connected to those. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked it. Give it a thumbs up. It helps fight the YouTube algorithm. Almost every video I do is claimed now. It's been nuts. The last 3 videos have been claimed in either limited or adult rated. So if you guys get a chance, give this a thumbs up, share it. Peace out. I hope you have an awesome time. No matter what, enjoy the rest of your week.
Perhaps if they knew more of the man underneath the armor, they would come to understand you as I have.
Maybe you're right. The Mark series can be pretty imposing.
I was not talking about your suit.
Oh, that's deep. Just like the garlic-rich flavor of Grandma Stark's famous sauce.
There's no way they can stop us. It's like a vitamin